Welcome to another episode of the Generative Edge. You're with your host Don, with my co-host Vyas. Give us a hi, Vyas. Amazing, and we are so excited to have David Thogmartin with us. Hi, David.
Hi, Donovan. Great to be here.
Good to have you here. David is an AI partner in our German practice, and he also leads our trustworthy AI framework and concept for Europe, actually. So, David, we are just so excited to have you here. We know you are a wealth of insight, so thank you for being here. We're going to jump straight into it because this is a topic that Vyas and I are so excited, and this topic of trust has been building over recent episodes as well. So we're so excited to have you here. But let's ask the open question. What is trustworthy AI, David?
Well, Donovan, trustworthy AI is an overarching concept. So it encompasses many things: AI quality, AI ethics, AI risk management, AI compliance. And it's founded on universal principles, which you will find probably on the websites of many AI-oriented companies. And I think we've done a particularly good job in capturing those key points within that framework. So we have transparency, fairness, robustness, privacy, security, accountability, and responsibility.
Very good. These are, I think a lot of the conversation to date has been, tech, but of course we've designed this podcast to target our C-suite leadership. And I think this topic is so important. So when we talk about, fairness and some of these AI-related topics under the banner of trustworthy, why is it important to a C-suite executive to really get a handle on this trustworthy concept?
Okay, sure. Well, trustworthy AI, I think, is important for three basic reasons. The first one is that it focuses development, testing, and operation of an AI on what's important to achieve a high-quality product. Many people call this guardrails. That's one reason. Another reason is that it helps organizations avoid the costs of perhaps misguided use cases or poor implementation of good use cases, whether or not those costs are in terms of actual euros, rework, or maybe fines, or even to their reputation. And thirdly, trust boosts acceptance of AI-based solutions. So that increases adoption, which is a good thing.
Yeah. It sounds like something to be thinking about from the onset of development, right?
Absolutely.
Guardrails is something we often hear at a technology level, but never in the framework of risk or compliance necessarily, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And Vyas, maybe from a technology perspective, guardrails, trustworthiness, just from your perspective as a technology expert, what's your view on this?
Fine. It is a critical point to actually adopt AI, right? So when we think about technology, the first thing anyone asks is, do you have enough guardrails? And that is something we as AWS also focus on to make sure that it is enterprise ready, to ensure that you have the right guardrails to know what is the right outcome. And can you make sure that you're not hallucinating enough, or you're not hallucinating to the point where it hurts the business? So all of that is an important part. And so I'm so excited, David, to get your perspective as well, right? In terms of why that quality of ethics is very important in this context. And I would love to hear your point of view on that.
That's good. And that leads me sort of to a next question, which I have, this topic of trustworthiness in the AI space is built largely around the foundation of people, compliance, legal work, and tech, of course, plays a huge role in that. David, I know from being a Deloitte that there's 5 key pillars in this space. Can you maybe walk us through what those look like?
Yeah, I think there are actually many ways to think about trustworthy AI. And to be totally honest, we've been at it for years, and I'll admit our views have evolved over time.
Sure.
Our current thinking is very strongly influenced by project experience we've made with clients, and those fall into roughly 3 categories. First one, I'll start with technology foundations. So these are mostly about avoiding issues by building in quality from the get-go. So it's very quantitative and it's very techy. This typically sits with AI engineers, with data scientists, or CIOs. That's only one piece. The next piece, I would say, is organizational readiness. So this is something that talks about how the effects of an AI could have, or what the effects of an AI could be on an organization. Also about ensuring that an organization is even aware of the possibilities and limitations and benefits and risks and things like this. This goes outside of the realm of the CIO or the data scientists. And when we talk about risks to a business, one of the greatest risks associated with AI could be not taking advantage of AI.
Sure.
So not having an AI strategy. It's not always saying, oh, how can the AI go wrong? But also considering, are we using it enough or in the right way? And then the third one is legal and compliance. And, let's face it, we work in a very highly regulated environment in Europe. And so this is a central topic for our clients and for us.
Yeah.
If we take the AI Act, for example, it's very wide-ranging, it's industry agnostic, and so that means parts of it will apply differently to individual client situations. We help navigate that. And despite the EU's, 337 pages written so far since last August and in February, there are gray areas, and there are even some inconsistencies in those texts, which would benefit greatly from legal interpretation.
David, I would want to kind of jump in a bit, right? So for us, when we think about trustworthy AI, right, you talked about 3 pillars, and I just want to kind of elaborate a bit because it's very important for our audience. One of the things which we think about, right, as AWS is that one of the technical robustness and safety, we talked about guardless. I think you also talked about it a bit, but we also think about transparency, right? So are we giving the right data out or right information out? Because that is something which everyone worries about, right, when it comes to AI. The second more things is that about fairness and is that non-discriminatory or discriminatory, right? How do you ensure that you stop some of those biases, for example? And then last but not the least, right, it's about how can I be sure about privacy and security as well, right? So how does that correspond to some of the things which you do? And probably that would actually give us a good, better view for the audience as well in terms of how you think about it, David.
Sure, yes. Well, a lot of those fall, at least in my view, underneath the topic of technical foundations. So when you talk about transparency, there's all sorts of explainable AI methods on how to create that. Now, most of the work that I've done with that in the past since 2017 has been on, let's say, machine learning, the machine learning variety of AI. There are lots of methods you can apply, Shapley values, contrastive analysis, these kinds of things to show which features are driving what you're getting, what output you're getting from an AI. When you look at more recent flavors of AI, like what we've seen with large language models, I would say that transparency is a key component in order to increase the credibility and believability of what's coming out of some of these models. We've all seen it.
Sure.
The chatbots, they're incredibly convincing. They sound or they read like a human has written them. And yet, if you don't do your homework and really check the content, you might find that some of it's made up. It's incredibly authentic, but it's not true. How do you get around that? There are many ways, but one of them is citing your sources. And you've probably seen that more and more with the chatbots that you can typically use as a consumer. Many times they'll have their statements footnoted with what the sources are to help you verify yourself. So that's a transparency aspect. In terms of bias, I've heard raging discussions on this topic and the idea of debiasing. I don't believe in that. I think the way to tackle bias is to do it at the source. So you want to identify bias. That means you have to be able to quantify it. And there is no one way to measure it. There's equal odds. There's all sorts of statistical parity difference. There's all sorts of metrics that you can use in different contexts that would be most suitable. For me, the key thing is to measure it, identify its source, and then go tackle it at the source. So those are a couple of examples. There are many others. Cybersecurity, robustness. People talk about the quality of output of a model, and it might be great when the model is in the lab, but when you put it into production, is it going to stay that way, or does it deteriorate over time? That's very possible with content, let's say data drift or content or concept shift. These things happen, and so it requires a kind of monitoring in order to evaluate whether or not that model is performing as well as it was on day one.
Which is interesting, and you touched on a couple of things, and I wanted to ask this question. Why is quality so important?
Well, what is quality? And quality is about providing value consistently and reliably. And I think that's really no different with AI than it is with many other types of product. So relevant functionality, intuitive presentation, bells and whistles, those attract customers, but it's reliable results, quality, that keeps them coming back for more. Maybe there's another reason why quality is important. I think honestly, it's the best defense for providers and deployers of AI to stay out of trouble. And what do I mean by that? I mean that AI is a fast-moving, highly competitive field. Providers are racing to make the next headline, and that often results in cutting corners. I think users these days have come to expect from many foundation models, from big tech providers to be amazing, but not necessarily the most reliable. Would you feel the same way about AI driving your car or deciding about your access to healthcare or to loans or to jobs or in administration of justice or in defense? I think you'll see when we move away from foundation capabilities to specific use cases, the tolerance for quality defects drops a lot. So quality is important also for acceptance and long-term viability of AI. And in Europe, it's a regulatory requirement.
It's fascinating to hear, right? So I think we've gone through a journey of how someone has actually implemented as well, David, in the past podcast. And this is still the most asked question. And I want to kind of put it in front of you again, like, how do we assure or ensure the quality? Because I think everyone gets the point that one of the fundamental principles of getting the right outcome, exactly to the point that would I actually rely on AI to drive the car? The answer is a long time ago, the answer was probably not, but now it's changing, right? So how do we ensure quality? Can you actually help us with some examples, perhaps with some real life scenarios, which would help us?
Sure. I think where you start with this is to define what quality is for the use case that you're working on. It's not always going to be the same. Let's look back at our trustworthy AI framework. I like to use that as a general compass for what quality is. If you were to say quality is just about accuracy, then I think you're missing at least 6, 7, 8 other dimensions.
That's good. Yeah.
Let's explore 2 examples. If you're giving a loan, you're granting a loan to somebody, you're going to be very concerned about fairness. So you want to stamp out bias from your loan decision algorithm. You're also going to want to be very careful with their personally identifiable information. So privacy will be a big concern. Now let's flip to a completely different use case. You're in a factory and you want to automate the detection of defects, manufacturing defects. Are you going to care about privacy? No. Are you going to care about bias? Not in the sense of fairness. You'll care about it in the sense of representative data, yes. But it's a completely different use case, and so you will define quality in a different way. So step 1, define what quality means for your use case. Step 2, figure out how to measure it. And then you design according to those principles, those metrics. You will use these metrics already in that design phase up front to design what your user acceptance tests are going to be. And then when you execute those tests later on, you don't have to go scratching your head and asking, well, against which ruler do I measure success? You already know because you thought about that from day one. That's just a quick high-level example.
Yeah, that's really good. And, back to the car story and, some of the use cases that you mentioned, where does ethics come into play? And we've heard hours worth of theory around AI ethics. What is it to you? How does it factor into your framework, David?
Okay. Well, you saw, Donovan, at the beginning when we talked about how Deloitte defines what trustworthy AI is in its framework. There are several of those segments that are very ethics-oriented, such as responsibility or accountability. But ethics, it's central to several decisions right from the start. So right from the birth of a use case, you can ask yourself questions like, should we build this just because we can? Is it responsible? Or does it fit to our company values, to our purpose? Or how will the stakeholders, those affected by this AI, how will they be affected? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? And are we okay with that? That's just from the beginning, but ethical considerations, they persist throughout the life cycle, well into development and through to operation. Things like, even if the use case itself is fine, are we designing and implementing it in a way that will serve reliably over time? For instance, will it be observable? So you could think of that as another way of being transparent. Would it treat customers fairly in line with legal protections? And something totally non-technical, if something goes wrong, is it clear who's accountable to fix it? I would say those are pretty much the core ethical considerations that you need to have accompany you throughout the AI lifecycle.
Yeah, you bring a very important point there, right? So in our words, we call these as the ethical design principles to keep in mind as you actually think about building a system. But what hit me hard and what you just called, David, is that there is an aspect of legality as well, right?
Yeah.
And I think your last statement was that do we actually can make anyone accountable? Is it the system or is it the team who's actually doing it? And I'm sure this is a question which you have heard this so many times. What's your perspective on that? I would love to understand that a little more, David.
Yes, it's not an easy question. And again, I think you have to go back to each individual use case because you will not have a one-size-fits-all answer to that. I've heard this for years with the trolley problem, for example. And for those of you who don't know the trolley problem, it's basically if you're riding in an autonomous vehicle and there is no way to avoid a tragic accident where somebody dies, should the vehicle choose who dies? That's the trolley problem. So that's an ethical dilemma. And there are car companies who have understandably taken the position that, yeah, sure, it's the passengers of my electric or autonomous vehicle whose lives should be spared. Of course, they will say that because it's their customers, right? And it's not entirely wrong. It's just these are very, very tough questions to tackle. I think in terms of ethics, you will find that taking a look at a use case one by one, deciding, like I said earlier, who the stakeholders are, or maybe how you could even remedy a situation. You asked the question, is it the AI that's responsible? I would flat out say no. There is no AI that even is, they don't really think. They're definitely not responsible for this. But then you could go into the direction of what we see with the AI Act. The AI Act talks about the quality management system. It talks about the risk management system. It talks about providers and deployers of the AI. Those are different roles. So a provider of the AI should develop this AI to have fundamentally strong and high quality characteristics to it, that it's been implemented soundly. But even if I, as a provider, were to develop an AI, I don't deploy it. The deployer is the one who determines in which context that technology will be applied. So there's a shared responsibility already there. You're probably going to find cases like examining the black box, trying to understand what happened when something goes wrong. Did it sit with cut corners on the end of the development side, or like with the provider, or was it more in terms of not being implemented, or sorry, not being deployed correctly, applied correctly?
Well, David, that's certainly very interesting, and I'd love to hear what your approach is in terms of services clients should be seeking, both technical, legal, compliance-based services in this space. Can you talk through what your typical approach is?
Absolutely. Well, when we looked at the trustworthy AI principles of the framework, they're great, but they don't say anything about what you can do about it, and not anything about how we help either. And that's why parallel to that, we've identified 15 services and a very modular approach in doing so. And these we've taken from project experience. So while client journeys resemble one another to a certain degree, each client faces its own market realities. It has its own strategy, its own teams, and its capabilities. And when we interact with clients, we do so at different stages along their journeys, some nascent, some scaling, others quite far along. So approaching them all the same way would neither be efficient nor particularly relevant. And that's why we put ourselves into their shoes and say, what would they need at this stage in the situation where they're in right now? And that's how we've come up with these 15 offerings.
And that could look like support around how to architect your technology, right, from a trustworthy perspective. It could look like legal consult. I mean, these are all types of services considered in this framework, right?
Absolutely. At the beginning, we talked about how we roughly group our thinking into 3 areas. There's the technical foundations, it was the organizational readiness, and then the legal and compliance. And that's the umbrella structure over which we put these 15 services.
Okay, brilliant. And let's quickly pivot to regulation. We sort of briefly just passed over the EU AI Act. You mentioned 300 odd pages of, I guess you're an avid reader then of the AI Act, David. Could you just give us a brief overview? What is, just skimming through some of the headlines, like what are the components touching the trustworthy framework that we should be very aware of from an EU AI Act perspective?
Well, let's be fair for one thing. The EU AI Act is not 337 pages long. Okay. It's around 140. It's around 148 pages long, at least in the English version. But the thing is, that was in August last year, and then in February this year, there was a supplementary publication, 2 supplementary publications, one on prohibited AIs and another one on defining what an AI system actually is. And if you add all that stuff together, that's where you get to the 337 pages. So it's quite a lot. So the AI Act, it's definitely comprehensive. It's a comprehensive regulation of AI put onto the European market. So that means it doesn't matter where the AI was developed, only that it is made available to EU citizens or EU residents. The AI Act is a product safety regulation. So its aim is really to protect EU residents from the potential harm that could arise through either unethical or incompetently implemented AI. In doing so, it does not treat all AI systems the same way. It starts already by differentiating between general purpose AI models and single purpose AI systems. So GPAI, general purpose AI, provides base capabilities. You can think of them like foundation models. Interestingly enough, the AI Act does not mention foundation models anywhere in it, but basically that's what these are. And their associated inherent risk is based on their sophistication, and that is measured through the amount of training computation required, so in floating point operations. Single-purpose AI, on the other hand, are focused on a particular use case, which could be either a system that is based on general-purpose AI model, or it could be based on something else, like machine learning that's been done individually by an organization, so homegrown, or a mixture of both. But the single-purpose AI use cases are categorized into unacceptable risk, high risk, or other. Basically, unacceptable risk are forbidden, high risk are regulated, and the other are not regulated. Which cases fall into which of these categories is a subject of its own. There's plenty of material you can read about that. We've written and published some ourselves.
Fascinating again there, right? So David, I might want to ask a question to simplify all of this, right? So we have a lot of viewers listening in. And I know when we started thinking about AI and doing certain things, usually there is this inhibition of, oh my gosh, do I know how to develop it?
Sure.
How do you ease their mind by saying, this is not rocket science, this is how you actually go and develop? If you need to summarize and give your advice, how to think about it for someone who's actually thinking about venturing into journey of AI, what would that be from your perspective, David?
Okay, I think the first thing to do is probably to ask yourself, is this a problem that should be solved by AI? I almost hate myself saying that because I'm very enthusiastic about AI, but the first thing that I discuss with my clients is let's talk about what the problem is you actually want to solve. If there's an easier way of doing it, a simple way of doing it, let's do it.
Yeah.
Many times what we find, however, is we don't get called in for the simple stuff. It's usually when something has been tried and it hasn't worked. So it's already a little bit later in the game, and now they're saying, the approach before just didn't bear fruit. What do we do? And that's usually a case where we do get involved with AI. The first thing is to identify maybe archetypes of what types of functionalities are available. And often what happens is we show some work that we've done in the past, something that's been anonymized or maybe a POC that we've developed in-house for ourselves to illustrate what the possibilities are. And why do I say that? Because you're going to get the most valuable ideas not coming from the IT department most of the time, but mostly from the business function. And they may not be so familiar with what all is possible with this technology. So we usually start with that. We show something that we've built already, and then the eyes open up and say, oh, wow, that's possible? Yes. Then we close that chapter and move on to say, okay, we've seen what's possible. Now, what do you need? And then we go through a process. Maybe we identify pain points or bottlenecks or rework loops or things like that to understand what it is they need. Because the last thing we want to do is sell something that is not really needed. We want to solve a problem. So I think that's how I would get started. Once you do that, the result of a workshop or a brainstorming session like that usually ends up with options. Depending on your appetite and how much, to what degree you want to automate things, or you want to keep your employees very much in the loop, there's a full spectrum.
David, maybe as a follow-up question, do you have any good examples of clients that you've worked with, obviously not naming names, where you've implemented this trustworthy AI framework and you've seen successful results on the outside?
Of course. I mean, this has been done at many industries and many different clients. The list is quite long. It could be retail. It could be even in defense. It could be where I spend most of my personal focus in banking and in insurance. Again, like I mentioned before, it's the use case often defines what is required in terms of quality, but also what is important in terms of trustworthy AI. So what are you concerned with? What failure modes are you worried about? That's one project we're working on actually right now. It is definitely inspired by the AI Act. So the AI Act roughly looks into two components, a quality management system and a risk management system. The quality management system addresses many of the topics we've already discussed, but the risk management system is a little bit different. It's trying to anticipate failure modes, where some of this stuff can go wrong, and maybe not so technical and so into guardrails and specific measurements of the performance of an aspect of an AI, but much more, much higher level, trying to understand, if I have this in place, might I become blindsided, or might my employees lose touch with what they're doing? These kinds of questions. That's also something that I've seen produce quite a lot of value. In essence, it's almost like a business continuity assessment, where you just look at all the possible ways where something could go wrong, and you're ready before they would go wrong with some kind of response. And that kind of loops back to this question we said earlier on in the call, where we talked about ethics, and one of those topics was accountability. If it does go wrong, who is responsible? But it's not just that. If it does go wrong, do we have a plan already now to fix it? Or are we surprised, shocked, and have absolutely no idea what to do? That's where the real benefit of a lot of these exercises are, is anticipating and thinking about these aspects long before they become problems.
Yeah, and that's good. And a follow-up to that, I wanted to ask you a question was, how can implementing this framework, as per your last point, actually become a competitive advantage? To a typical organization? Do you see it as a competitive advantage?
Oh yeah, I think Quality, first of all, like I said, was it's what keeps customers coming back for more. You can have flashy bells and whistles, and it will grab some attention briefly, but what really retains customer interest is the quality. So if you build that into your product, you will have loyal customers. If you fail to build that into your product, you might have some real embarrassing situations, which we've seen in the market. They're no secret. There have been cases where some AI savvy companies, and kudos to them that they're using AI in their business models, but maybe at a nascent stage and have overlooked some necessary quality measures such as rigorous testing, not just before deploying the first time, but before deploying an update to an already running system. And what they have found is that once they flip the switch and put it into production, it is not behaving in the way that they had expected. So I have a particular example in my mind where a client service or customer service chatbot, which is supposed to help the customers of this particular company, no longer did that. Instead was rude with customers and also disparaging about its own employer. So that's something that it has nothing to do with the fundamental technology itself. It has to do with testing procedures.
But that's an interesting point, and I'm thinking as I'm listening to you now, like there seems to be this inherent tension where I need to employ these technologies in order to be competitive and show that I'm a forerunner in this space versus taking the time to think through it properly. Do you see this tension in and amongst our clients? And what would your advice be to that maybe?
There's always a race to get things done, right? So that is a bit the risk that you have. If the focus is on just getting results fast and not thinking about where things could go wrong, I think eventually all companies will start to adopt a risk mindset, but some will do so proactively. Others will wait until something hits them to do that. That's I guess a mindset or a statement of priorities. But I personally believe that the cost of ignoring quality is too high to not have considered it already in the design phase, in the development phase, in the testing. It's something you don't want to pay those prices, whether they are rework, whether they are fines, or whether they are reputational damage. My personal view, but I think that's something that many are coming around to right now, because AI there will not be less AI in business models. There will be more. So if we can ensure this quality, not just for the sake of compliance, but for the sake of good business sense, and if we get into a routine of how to do that, then it becomes efficient as well as effective. So I would say it's something that should be a core competency built into any product development cycle.
And Don, I think that's a very valid question for everyone to think about, right? So you need to learn your way into this. That's one perspective, which I would say. Always start off with something which you can learn with. There are a lot of process automations which probably would not get into business critical decisions like what David was talking about. And once you know how everything operates, slowly venture into your critical applications, right? So nothing stops from you doing it if you already have the experience, or take experience like someone like Deloitte to actually venture into that big initiative upfront. If not, making sure that you understand how it works and then eventually riding your way through is the best option, is something which I would want to just add onto this conversation. It's been fascinating, by the way, David. I appreciate what you're sharing.
Thank you, Vyas. Let's not forget the biggest risk probably of AI is not having AI in your business strategy. So don't forget that side.
So David, as you know, the AI space is innovating and changing so fast, right? So what are the innovation and trends you are seeing? And would love to hear your perspective around that, David.
Yes, there is a genuine race to reveal the next most powerful model. Interestingly, it's not just between cloud source giants like Amazon or OpenAI or Google or Anthropic. It's also other players, and open source is also growing in importance, led by Meta, by Mixtral, and new entries from China with Alibaba's Qwen and Highflyer's DeepSeek. They've added to this open source momentum and disrupted a little bit. So that's one trend that I see. However, I would say arguably the most important trend is agentic AI. And why is that? Agents don't just answer questions, they execute actions. We've seen the precursors of this with large language model reasoning engines, and these have become, ever more powerful. O1, O3, Gemini 2, Grok 3, DeepSeek, R1, et cetera, et cetera. Agentic AI will put these reasoning engines to work, planning how to solve a given task, identifying the right tools to get the job done, and then using these tools. So I expect agents to bring massive change to business and to society because they will allow us to lengthen the autonomy chain rather than humans having to intervene here and there when they operate isolated tools. Maybe one other trend that I also see coming up is a gradual move away from text-only GenAI to large concept models. And this is happening via multimodal models. So that's in the pursuit of something grander, bigger, the AGI question. So true intelligence, whatever that is. Jan LeCun, he's one of the AI godfathers. He said, if you want to pursue AGI, don't waste your time with LLMs. And he's probably right. But our current designs based on revolutionary transformer architectures are really impressive. And they are probably very different from natural intelligence. They're huge. 8 billion parameters is just a standard size. And we can't forget that a fruit fly with 150,000 neurons can do more or a wider variety of tasks than an LLM with 8 billion. What does that mean? It means we're not very efficient. Still, GPT 4.5 is here. GPT-5 is around the corner. And all of these will join together with other predecessor models into something that will take us one step closer to AGI. Again, however we define that.
I think that is certainly a line to close on. David, this has been massively insightful. Thank you so much. I actually feel like I could sit here and just keep talking to you. I think this is a great perspective in this first season. So really, thank you for your time again. I hope to have you in the second season as well. We're good to catch up. As we know, the pace at which these innovations are moving is just rapid at the moment. So David, once again, thank you. Really, really appreciate your time. And to our listeners, do not forget to generate responsibly. We'll catch up with you soon.